welcome everybody to the first Client Listening in Action webinar from Meridian West for 2023. We're delighted to be kicking off the new year with Shaendel Hallett, who joins us from Grant Thornton to talk today about all the exciting work that she's been doing with the firm around client listening over the last couple of years, to talk to us a little bit about the journey that both she and Grant Thornton have been on, and all the kind of learnings that she's taken from that experience over the last few years. There will be the opportunity to kind of throw questions to Shaendel, so please do put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and cover those before the end if we can. I'm also delighted to say I'm joined by my colleague Ben Kent, founder director of Meridian West, and he's here to provide some kind of context and also to talk about some of the support that he and the team have given to Grant Thornton through the kind of experiences that Shaendel will be talking about today. So maybe a good starting place for the conversation today, Shaendel, will be to just perhaps tell us a little bit about, when you first joined Grant Thornton. The firm wasn't kind of new to client listening, but obviously has evolved kind of significantly over the last few years. But tell us a little bit about, when you joined, kind of stepped into this role, what the kind of state of play was at Grant Thornton.
Yeah, sure, Alastair, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Hopefully, you'll recognise some of the challenges that I'm about to talk about. So when I joined Grant Thornton, it'll be nearly 5 years ago now, there'd been an insight or kind of feedback programme running for about 10 years. And I think, it had become more of a compliance tool to hit kind of people with a bit of a stick with. It didn't land particularly well within the business, and at the time, operationally, it was costing the business more money to fix the issues with the technology than it was we were actually spending on the program itself. So we took a pause on what we were doing, because some of the challenges that I faced coming into the role, looking at the data and looking at the program, were primarily around, we had world leading net promoter score. So we were above the likes of Apple and Google, which I think intuitively we all knew wasn't right. And that's because the base size was completely skewed, because the targets that were set were driving the wrong behaviours across the business. And that meant that, really only the best of the clients were being put through for feedback. So it was kind of a bit like marking your own homework, really, and giving yourselves a bit of a pat on the back. There was a real kind of lack of accessibility to the feedback. So the feedback came through to kind of service function that was held within marketing and kind of an insight function, and then it was distributed out. But everything was kind of stored on the insights kind of computer drives, so no one had access to anything once it kind of got shared out. So there was no way of looking at the data, and in that way there was no ways of pulling together the data to really think about what the key themes are across different service lines and across the firm as a whole. So the way that the insight function was set up was very much kind of a process-led and service function, which was just kind of manually handling the data and passing it on as such. One of the biggest issues, which I'm sure lots of people on the call will be familiar with, is the kind of low engagement, or I guess for me it was more kind of lack of accountability at a senior leadership level. It certainly felt more like a tick box exercise from a regulatory perspective, that we were getting feedback. There was definitely a fear of feedback, which I know because in her is kind of part of our kind of human behaviour, particularly in B2B when it's based on personal relationships. But there was definitely that, which then again with the targets made people really worried about putting through clients who things hadn't gone particularly well for. So we never got a really good representation of the client experience, which meant that we couldn't really improve anything, because we always thought we were doing a fantastic job, really, which was kind of, nonsensical, really. So we've spent a lot of time, and I'll talk about that later, about how we've repositioned that within the business as well. And we did both online surveys and kind of qualitative feedback, which we used to do through a third-party supplier, the call interviews that used to be run for us. And then that data wasn't pulled together, so they were looked at in isolation. So we really didn't have kind of the power of kind of blending that data to really leverage what we knew.
And I wouldn't. Sorry to cut in. I just wonder, Ben, kind of reflecting on what you've heard from Shaendel there in terms of the starting point for GT, albeit 4 or 5 years ago, how common is that from what you see across firms today in terms of where many firms are at in their feedback or listening maturity?
I think fairly typical. I think, the vast majority of professional firms are doing some sort of feedback, but often it's quite ad hoc. It's done once or twice a year. It's seen as a bit of compliance. It, it's not looking forward, if you like, and it's just lacks a bit of sort of creativity, if you like. And I think that's bringing creativity to client feedback, I think, is the key, actually.
Yeah, and actually, just to kind of tag on to that, what you're saying, Ben, I think my last point around kind of the key challenges was really around the lack of comms to drive the value of the feedback across the firm. So again, it was kind of very much kind of held within function or held at a team level, and so nobody really got to understand, the value that it could bring more broadly, I guess, across the firm. So it was kind of this secret, I guess, that was happening. If that's what it felt like when I joined, really, like a compliance tool that was all about kind of ticking the box, and we know we have to do it, but we don't really want to talk about it.
Which is such a shame, isn't it? Because you do these interviews with so much insight there, about the firm, the business, and I think really it's about client feedback, kind of professionals to really kind of bring that alive and share it, because so many different audiences within firms that could use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I can talk through, Alastair, perhaps kind of my kind of key considerations when starting to set up, taking on board all of those challenges. And I think the first one was really around, how authentic was our approach? So it's going back to that kind of tick box exercise, are we doing it just for the sake of doing it? Really do something that's game changing, really launch an initiative that's service to match our clients' needs. And how could we then leverage that kind of high growth potential of a really successful CX strategy, which then would correlate with other measures within the firm, which more traditional ones like revenue and share of wallet as well. So that was always on my mind, not just look at CX in isolation, but to see how we could pull some of that operational data in and EX data too. And going back to that kind of comms point was really around, do colleagues across the firm, so not just client-facing ones, but does everybody understand the role that they've got to play in CX? And that was definitely something that again wasn't really talked about. It was very much seen as, client experience is only really important if you're in a client-facing role. But obviously we know, going through kind of the feedback, we've got issues in terms of things like billings, for example. So they, have a role to play within that too. And one really simple thing was how is CX kind of weaved throughout the business? So, an example would be the key strategy documents, like our letter of engagement. How does that refer to client experience and feedback specifically to make sure that we're talking to clients as soon as, we onboard them about it? And who ultimately can help champion client experience? So I wanted to move us from a service function to be very much more a kind of strategic business partner. So yes, we can, handle the process of collating the feedback, but actually our role is to ensure that action is taken off the back of the feedback. And we have within service lines and within teams, other people who understand that and are embedded to help, because our team's really lean. So it's, how can we use others across the business to be those advocates for us, both at a top level, but also throughout the business, because, that's often the people, I guess, are kind of on the ground doing the work. They're the ones you want to be kind of talking about it and talking to their teams about, what they're doing differently and how they value it as well.
And how, just on that, I'm interested, how do you, how did you go about identifying the right people to fill those, to be those champions? Because as you say, it's a kind of crucial role. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, none of this has been a kind of an easy task. I think, you know what you want to do, but getting to where we are today has taken quite a long time. And I'd say that actually we kind of went through a bit of a process with those, we call them kind of client voice champions, that are embedded now. And they, I guess, are our steering committee that we go to. They are a mixture of not just kind of junior colleagues, but a mixture of senior colleagues as well. So we've got a few partners on the board, we've got some PAs and kind of some junior associates as well. And we kicked off the session with them, I think it was at the start of last year or just at the end of the year before, with our senior kind of board sponsor, and bringing them in, really relaying to them kind of what we expected from them, what the purpose of was, and very much trying to communicate the message that it wasn't just about doing an admin task or process, that this role is fundamental to the growth strategy of the firm. And I think, people really want to be involved in that because they want to be a part, they want to put it in their performance reviews. And so now we've got kind of a bit of a waiting list for people who want to be involved in it. But it took a while to kind of get going with it.
And how important was because you mentioned a few times in terms of the leadership, some of those champions being, on the board already, but how instrumental was that very senior buy-in to driving the changes you've been talking about?
Absolutely. And I think, for me, it was really important to understand that it wasn't just kind of lip service, that there really was kind of buy-in. So I kind of held, I guess looking back now, quite bravely, when we put a pause on the programme and started to think about what we wanted to do, I kind of, challenged each of the SLT members to, come on board and take part in the things like the online, the strategic reviews, the in-depth qualitative reviews that we would do, for them each to have a target that they would have to participate. At the time, it was about I think one or two a quarter, and so last year it's approximately sort of 50 to 60% of those strategic reviews have been done by an SLT member. And so they then can start to, have those client anecdotes to then share in their meetings. It's all kind of this kind of cyclical, I guess, and drip feeding it through. But, I think they understood the value of it. And we got to the point where if, for example, they couldn't make one of the client meetings, they weren't allowed to drop it. They had to find another SLT member to complete it. And just little changes like that have made a significant difference as well. And I think just being part of the programme. So we have a Teams channel that I have with the SLT. So we, on a kind of weekly or bi-weekly basis, drip feed through some really good feedback, but then also the not so good feedback and what the team are doing about it. And I think that's really helped because historically, I think maybe the service function would go to the SLT once a year, or maybe, maybe they're lucky twice a year. So there wasn't any real engagement or follow-up. And I think I found that this kind of drip feeding the data through, not just waiting to the quarterly MI pack or the quarterly deck gets pulled together, but sharing with them, as soon as things come through that are, great news, and focusing on the improvements, but also celebrating and recognising successes as well, which is really important for the programme.
Because that I think is a really interesting point, because I think, and again, it'd be interesting in your reflections on this, Ben, but we often see firms, as you said, maybe giving, management or boards, maybe it's those quarterly kind of key metrics around client experience, or maybe it's even just a kind of once a year deep dive. But it sounds like, that regular drip feed, what are we hearing on the ground, regular, often, good news and more challenging feedback is, has been instrumental. And Ben, what's your kind of reflection on that, or are there any other kind of, comms, that you've seen work well in the context of kind of reporting on feedback?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is almost as important as the research itself. So I think moving away from kind of PowerPoint decks with bar charts and kind of little and often, and almost thinking, what's the business want to hear about, and how can we communicate that in the most effective way? So just little things can be really useful. So oftentimes I'm doing a global feedback program at the moment. So we started off with asking clients for if they're happy to give a testimonial. So we capture all those testimonials, distribute all of those. It's immediate, quick win. And you can put those straight into proposals, identifying individuals who've done a great job, and then celebrating their success. Creating, if you're doing in-depth interviews, you can often record those. You can turn those into little video clips, and we've done kind of partner workshops. We start with a video compilation of everything they love about the firm and things that frustrate them, and it has a real big emotional impact, and kind of encourages people to change.
And so, Shaendel, sketch out for us a little bit in terms of where you are now, what kinds of feedback activity. You talked a little bit about, historically there was some online and partner interviews and things like that. But tell us a little bit about, 2023, what the program, what shape it looks like today.
Yeah, so we've got a core program which is made up of online surveys. So these we've reduced to about 5 to 7 minutes to complete. They are split approximately sort of 70-30. So 30% is around our service performance and delivery, because we want to know how we're doing and we want that quantitative governance of performance for the business. But the rest is very much focused on trying to, I guess, ascertain clients' future wants and needs. So we can do lots of kind of key driver analysis with that, which has been really, really important. And within the online surveys, we ask for a quote or testimonial and for their consent. And that we've kind of got algorithms that sit in the background of our programme that send that through to our knowledge hubs. It goes straight into the library, and we've got other kind of closing the loops within that as well. So, for example, on our Net Promoter Score, if it's a low scoring client, we've got some SLAs around how we respond to that really quickly. It also goes to the partner. Everything online goes to the partner in real time, but when it's not a particularly good score, it also goes to the service line lead as well. So we just make sure we're quick at actioning that. And then we have our strategic reviews. So as I mentioned, there are kind of in-depth conversations. They take about 45 minutes on Teams to do. Moving to Teams actually, because of COVID, I think it's probably been one of the best things for us, because they used to take up a lot of time doing the face-to-face reviews, going, it wasn't a particularly effective use of the partner's time or the client's time. I feel that they've been much more informal through Teams, and people feel much more willing to talk about themselves as well. So that's been really crucial for us. And again, we ask questions within both the online surveys and strategic reviews around our service performance and kind of future wants and needs. But to your point, Ben, as well, around recognising team kind of successes, we ask about which team members have exceeded expectations, and we share that more broadly and use our reward system internally for that too. But one of the most successful things we've done is kind of sits outside that core programme, and that's been the ability to create ad hoc surveys to support the business. And this is what we first started with, actually, to try to get a bit more trust and buy-in from the business around the value that feedback could bring. So last year we did 10 of them. We've already got a couple in the pipeline in this quarter, and they are kind of short, kind of snappy surveys where the results of those have allowed us to work with internal teams to produce marketing content, thought leadership. There was an example recently. We talked to big lenders about ESG. We created a report, shared it on social media and LinkedIn. It got picked up by lots of industry publications. A large commercial bank picked it up, asked us to bid, and we won a significant piece of work. So being able to demonstrate that kind of power of feedback and being able to use that to have a bit more gravitas in the market on a particular sector has been really important for us. So we'll be looking to do more of that as we move forward. And I think to complement all of that, we've done some client focus groups too.
Interesting.
Which has helped.
I might come back to that in a minute. We just had a question in from Kirsty, who talks about or asks about the online surveys that you've been doing, what the kind of typical response rate you get is. And also, I suppose a kind of follow-up for me is, how broadly do you go in terms of, is the intent to try and survey every client or the whole client base, or how selective are you?
Yeah, so the premise now is that all clients should be given an opportunity to provide feedback at least once a year. So we've got our kind of core programme, which is the more kind of relationship survey and transactional. And what we're looking to broaden out this year is more across the client journey. So looking at the onboarding and the bid debrief, wins and losses as well. In terms of survey responses, I think the industry's rate's about 10% kind of on average, and ours tends to sit about 35 to 40%. We do some work before the email goes out to the client. So we ask the engagement lead to send a note to the client to let them know that it's come in, and we find that really helps with response rates. The survey that goes out, it's Grant Thornton branded. It comes from the Grant Thornton email address. It looks really nice and kind of slick. It's mobile friendly as well. And we send reminders. That's automated in the system too.
Great. And another question just come in, just while I've noticed it, is in terms of, you mentioned before about kind of linking to performance, reward, recognition. Anything more you can say about that in terms of, how that works? Is it to do with the amount of feedback collected? Is it to do with the actual feedback itself? How does that play into performance review?
It's a little bit of everything, actually. So it's not kind of a blanket approach at the moment. We've kind of moved away from the amount of feedback because that seemed to drive the wrong behaviours. We also try to not look at scores in isolation as well, because in the world of audit, for example, actually we probably don't want to be getting 10s out of 10s, because we might think to ourselves, well, maybe we haven't challenged rigorously enough to be getting those scores. So, and also focusing on the scores again can drive the wrong behaviours, because people get kind of hooked on that score. And actually what we really want to do is understand the context of a score, because it could have been a really difficult client to work with, but also in terms of the context of the score, it's about the action moving forwards is what we want to focus on. And so we're quite, sensitive around how we manage the data and how we present it back to the business as well. In terms of rewards, so one of the service lines this year, their kind of mandate to their teams is, if you don't have any client feedback by the time you get to the end of the year, and that's probably, looking at some robust feedback on a quarterly basis, then you won't be rewarded and remunerated as those that do. So there's a really clear distinction then. And at kind of a lower end of the scale, we've got our internal reward system. It's called 3 Cheers, where you can nominate people, to get kind of £100 vouchers and things like that. And we have a league table of those exceeding expectations, which we share with each service lines too. So there's we've got quite a competitive bunch, our firm, which I'm sure most people do have as well. So everybody wants to see the name on the board, and that's really helped too. And I think, sometimes it's just a bit of a pat on the back, actually. So those great client feedbacks, the 10 out of 10s, they go straight through to our board sponsor now, and he will send a note both to the client but also to this internal team to say well done too. So it's a kind of an amalgamation, I guess, of lots of different things.
And sorry, I was just going to say, because obviously there's a lot of different strands of activity that you've outlined, and there's a question just coming from Ruth about how do you really kind of understand when's the best time to reach out for feedback for a particular client? Are there moments when you will or you won't ask for feedback? How does that tend to work?
Yeah, I think we're still not 100% there with that yet. It's trying to work out the triggers, and that kind of event-driven client feedback is really challenging, because each team within each service line is quite nuanced in terms of their approach and the way that they work. And what we want to do is have an overarching program for the firm, but also flexible and agile enough to be able to deliver some bespoke answers for each of those teams, but at the same time keep consistency as well. So it's not easy. Typically what we do at the moment is all clients who've been billed in the past 12 months are eligible for feedback, and we've created a client voice portal where those clients are pulled in, and each partner and engagement lead has access to their list of clients who are suitable for feedback, and they can click a button for whether it should be an online survey with some parameters around what that looks like, or a strategic review, predominantly for those kind of high growth potential clients too. And we work with PAs to kind of manage those lists. And exclusions are by exception, I guess, really, which has been quite a big step change, because what used to happen is we would get told that we don't want to speak to the client right now, it's not the right time, and that client would just go on and on and on, never to be spoken to. Whereas now that's kind of escalated up to their service line leader level as well. And by exception, an extreme example, but if a client was to be suing us, for example, we obviously wouldn't want to be asking them for their feedback at that moment in time. And we split our surveys more around relationship and then transactional. So transactional at the end of a piece of work, and the relationship throughout that journey. Yeah.
And Ben, just kind of reflecting on what we've been hearing on the Grant Thornton example, I mean, any other thoughts you'd add in terms of obviously working with GT and what you've seen from a kind of outsider's perspective, as it were, kind of work well from the GT context?
I think the other aspect which is really advanced is the kind of use of technology to kind of automate the collection of data, take a lot of because I see a lot of projects, particularly with lots of in-depth interviews, where you really get bogged down in terms of the admin, and that takes the central team's time. So I think that's really exciting, and basically having one place where you can use the insights, and that gives you great facility then to have all sorts of different streams of research coming into one place, and you can just you can give it to the leadership, and you can just type in, okay, what's the business challenges for this practice area, and it's super easy. And then that frees up the insight team to then focus on the communication, the engagement, the follow-up. I think that's critical. And the other area which I think is really interesting is kind of lots of people have kind of in-depth interviews and then quantitative interviews is, I think what GT and others are doing is pulling those two together. So, and the technology can now cope with that. So you can code up quite quickly even quite open-ended interviews.
Yeah, I think so. I was going to say, Ben, I think you're spot on there in terms of the technology. You know, we've really embraced it. And I think, you know, the first 2 years was very much around kind of stakeholder engagement and consultation, and looking at the tech in parallel. And actually this month or this quarter, we are just launching our client voice. We're calling it a dashboard, which always makes me shiver because it's just like feels like another dashboard. So I need to think of it like a jazzier name for it. But we've shown it to come key stakeholders in the business, and they love it because it's, you know, as you say, it's, you know, it's all in real time. It's at their fingertips.
Yeah.
You know, they can look at their, you know, their partners or their, you know, their teams, how they're performing. They can look, you know, if they want to see how other teams are performing, how other parts of the business are performing. So again, it's that competitive edge on it too.
And on that point you just made, it sounds like the plan is to be quite transparent with that, so that people can see how, you know, not just their own teams, but the business generally is performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to have that openness and transparency of the data, or the feedback. Again, you know, being fairly lean team, you know, we want to focus this year on that kind of thought leadership, the content generation, making sure that the actions are being done as a result of the insights, rather than just being the port of call. You know, have you got the latest, you know, feedback report on such and such, or, you know, can I have my data for this area? It's much more that self-serve element, really, which is important.
I think just chipping in on that, I think that's again where the technology can help. So you can create kind of APIs between the survey tool back into the CRM system. You can begin to analyze kind of feed data with survey data. It can be extremely powerful. And also on some of the dashboards now, you can kind of do close feedback loops, so you can track actions. Because often if you're doing these at scale, there'll be an awful lot of either opportunities to pursue or service issues to address. And so having a central way of monitoring that is incredibly valuable.
And you're right, I was going to say, pulling in that operational data, feed data, for example, has been really important to us. So we, you know, do some analysis around kind of our net promoter score, you know, versus client fees, and the insights that we can get from that have been really fundamental to inform, you know, our kind of tail end strategy at the moment, and then give BD teams a look as to what they need to do with those other clients to give them what they're asking for, really. Exactly. So it's been really integral.
We've had another question in. I know you've talked a little bit about the different strands of activity, but you know, overall, do you have a sense of kind of what the overall volume of feedback looks like? Are we talking about hundreds of clients, or how, you know, if you had to kind of put a figure on the amount of feedback you collect each year, where's GT at?
Yeah, in the last sort of 12 months or so, we've probably collected about 750 bits of feedback, and that's probably an even split between online surveys and strategic reviews. And the task this year is to build on that, and, you know, again, kind of now the business has seen the value of it. You know, there's huge buy-in. So I hope by the time we get to this time next year, we'll see that grow, because they can see, you know, what they can do with the data now, and how they can use it to help inform, you know, all the value proposition work and strategy development.
Yeah. And just a final question, which I think is a good one, maybe to kind of start to tie some of these threads together. You know, you've talked about obviously client experience, some of the behaviors that you want to both measure through the feedback, but also kind of encourage more generally with the firm. Can you just say maybe anything about how, you know, the kind of CX measurement feeds into a broader client experience strategy in terms of measuring, you know, Grant Thornton's performance in the market, and where you want to kind of really be known for client experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a kind of fundamental pillar of our new brand strategy, which was Go Beyond, and we measure that within our surveys as well. Everybody has it now across the business in their performance goals, so that's PAs and non-client facing teams as well, which has been a huge, I think, step change too. And I think, you know, where we were sort of 3-4 years ago, people just didn't talk about CX in terms of those kind of behaviors, I guess. Whereas now people really think about it, and so much so, you know, if you are developing a new product or service line, CX is first and foremost what the people are thinking about, how that's going to land as well. And I think that's been really important to us. Things like our strategy documents, like I mentioned, like a letter of engagement, etc. It's in there now as well. So we're not quite there yet. You know, we've got a long way to go still, but, you know, it's starting to really feel like we're living and breathing CX internally much more so than we used to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time already. I feel like we could keep talking for a long time to go, but it's been really brilliant to hear the Grant Thornton story, not just the kind of the processes and the kind of systems that you've put in place, but from the way you've described it, the kind of the mindset, the culture shift around client experience and kind of where you are now. I think is a really leading example for others to follow. So really big thanks to Shaendel there, and obviously to Ben too for kind of sharing some of your wider thoughts, and thanks everybody for your questions and joining in. Look out, we are coming up with more webinars this year, both in our Client Insights in Action and Thought Leadership in Action series. There'll be more details on that coming your way very soon. But for now, today, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks all. Bye now.